Hello, welcome back to the channel, or welcome in if this is the first time you're seeing me. You may have seen this build behind me floating around somewhere on the internet, and if you haven't, that's alright too. I had a lot of requests for people kind of asking a more specific, in-depth tutorial on how to make this specific burnt house, and I thought that I'd do a little video kind of explaining my tips and tricks on how I built this one. It's not going to be a super specific tutorial because the best thing about builds like this is their uniqueness and the story that they tell, which we'll get into a little bit later. But for now, here's 5 basic steps on how to build your own burnt house. Let's get started. So for those of you who haven't seen this house, let's take a look at it as a whole. Of course, we've got this lovely burnt house section, which was the main part of the build. We've got a big house, we've got some cool colours, some very random blocks kind of sticking out, some smoke effects, and we've got our lovely background. And it looks pretty cool from afar, so let's break it down. The very first thing I do for builds like this, and basically all of my builds, is I look up some reference pictures. This build in particular was incredibly helpful to have those reference pictures on hand, because I needed to know how the structure of a house would kind of sit in its burnt way. Because guessing these kind of things, it doesn't make it look super realistic, so having about 5 or so reference images is super helpful. So just Google and find a few that you really like, maybe about 3 to 5, and keep them in a folder just for you to look back on as you build. Now the second step of this video, and kind of the first step of actually building, is to just build a house. Don't try and build a burnt house, just build a house to begin with. So that's what I did here. Before I even built this whole half of a section, this was all just a normal house. So this whole house is very symmetrical, so it wasn't too hard. I made a very basic color palette and layout, added some windows or where I would like the windows to be, and just finished it as a normal neighborhood house. Now why is this helpful? Well, it gives you a really good idea of kind of making a layout of what the house would look like, where you want the fire to start, and how the structure itself holds up when it's not burnt. It helps you figure out where the highly structured parts of the house are, and the parts that maybe would have burnt a lot easier or caved under the pressure. So when you build a house like this, you don't have to do too much. Again, I did nothing for the interior. Just decide whereabouts you would want your rooms to go. So for me, I wanted this to be the kitchen. I wanted this to be where the fire had started. So ideally, if this was a normal house, you would walk in, maybe a living room here, a bathroom or laundry or something, and then a kitchen and dining room here. And then upstairs have some bedrooms as usual house would, but having an idea of where exactly the kitchen would be helped me figure out where I should start building this burnt section. So figuring out a basic layout and floor plan of your house before you burn it is very important. The third step for building a house like this is to, of course, figure out your color palette. Contrast is super important for a house like this because you need that silhouette element. So I would recommend your house be a lighter color. So this house here, my main house color palette was jungle planks, packed mud, a little bit of polished granite here and there, and tuff. These were the main blocks that I decided to use. So tuff for the roof and any of the windowed sections, places that would be a bit more structured, and then granite for a little bit of texturing, nothing major, but it just has a little cool paint peel effect. And then jungle planks and packed mud have a very similar color, and it was really cool to have some faded sections. And that kind of has the same thing with the strip jungle wood what we have here, to just have some more faded elements. Now that was the main color palette for my house. It's quite light in color, so it's very easy to contrast with some of the blocks we used for the burnt section. If your house was made out of too dark of a block, that contrast, while still possible, is much harder to do than if you have a lighter house. So if you're just building this for the first time, I would recommend using blocks like sandstone or birch or any of the lighter terracotta colors. They're pretty perfect for houses like this. And of course, the color palette for the burnt section, we have the black terracotta, we have a lot of the nether brick variants, we have some black stone, and some black concrete. And those are the main blocks. We have a couple things here and there. Oh, we'll grab some chains because I think they're important. And yeah, otherwise just very similar colors. And you may look at these now, and not many of these colors are actually very black in color. We have the nether brick, which of course is a more reddy, purpley color, and the black terracotta, which is brown. And we do have the black concrete and black stone, which are the only black colors we've got here, because the chain is also more of a grey. But the reason these are able to work is because we have that contrast. Because these blocks are much darker than the stripped jungle and the jungle planks, it contrasts very well. It looks a lot darker than it actually is in comparison to the lighter colors we've used for the base of the house. And one of the other things to note, which is pretty important for a burnt house, is don't just look at the colors when you're picking out a block palette. You need to kind of pick these weird blocks. So we've got the nether brick, walls and fences, and a lot of the slabs and chains, because it gives that very decrepit, broken down look, just with things jutting out everywhere. And that's also where the chains help quite a lot. I love the chains. But yeah, picking blocks like that have bits jutting out are really helpful to get that texture and idea of a burnt house. Now with the color palettes, there's also a couple other things that I'd like to point out. So when building a burnt house like this, it's important for you to create a story. So like I said with building a house and figuring out what rooms and where the fire would start, it's very important to know that before you pick out your block palette. So for example, with this build specifically, I did a few darker blocks here to show that the fire has scorched some of the roof, but not quite burnt through. And that's also why we've got some more basalt and deep slate over here. But if you used, for example, deep slate normally, where I've got the tuff here, you would probably have to use something a little darker like the black stone we've got here. I promise I'll explain a little bit further once we go on to some of the next steps. And actually it kind of leads us perfectly into the fourth step, because this step is specifically about finalizing your story and refining it. Exactly where you want the fire to start and where you've built your basic charred sections. You need to think about the layout of your house, and it's also the reason that it's important to just build your house regularly. So for example, because I built my house regularly before, I decided I wanted a window right here. And I wanted a window here, and then one at the top here. Those are where I decided the windows would fit the best. And because of that, these are the spots that are the most bare and barren. They've got the most things jutting out, and it's got big holes. And that's because whenever you look at any of the reference pictures you have, all of the places with windows, the glass is shattered. That's just what fire does. It'll just explode the windows out. So obviously there's not going to be any glass, and it's the weakest threshold of the house. But as well as that, some of the strongest points of the house are actually the window sills and the window panes. So all of these sections around the window are fairly built up and not quite as burnt. And that's just because structurally that's how a house works. It makes sense. So when you built all of this burnt section for the final part, you can just break down those areas that would be the weakest structurally. So for example, this roof section is, because this is where the main fire, the main blaze would be peeking out of, because it would have climbed up pretty high over here, burst this section out. And same with over here, just the sides of the roof aren't very structurally integral, but the top of the roof here is usually fairly reinforced. So that's why we've got this part sticking out a little bit more than other spots. So it's very important to figure out how your blaze, how your fire moves, and how you want it to move. And again, you can also keep refining this. The good thing about houses like these is you can, if you think you've taken away too much of an area, you can just build it back up again and have a look back. And if you think there's an area that's a bit too built up, you can always break it down and add some jutting out bits that look like wood or metal sticking out from the frame of the house. Now the final step of a burnt build like this is the final details. Of course, I mean, it's the final step. The final details just make sense. So the important final details to kind of tie your whole build in together is, while you could stop there with just the burnt section, the house, the contrast, it does look cool, but it looks out of place. And it's important to kind of make it look like it's been placed into the environment and it makes sense. So things that I've done to help with that is I added some scorched dirt, because I mean, all the plants and the plant life around here would be completely burnt, and the grass would be burnt, there'd be sand, dirt, and ash everywhere. So it's important to add a little bit of terraining, just darken the section around your burnt area, just to help fuel that idea of this was a fire and this spread. Some other details that I added were, of course, the burnt plants. We've got some coral and dead bushes scattered around just to look a little bit scorched. And we've also got candles that look like they're kindling, because the story for my house is this was a blaze that was only very recently put out. So we've still got little embers kindling every so often. We've got smoke rising around, smoke up the top, and a lot of other little things that help convey that story. One of my other favourite details is these little bits of debris, and I highly recommend, because again, if you look at all your reference pictures that you would have gotten at the start, most of these burnt houses will have bits of debris scattered everywhere. So I've got 2 big spots, and I kind of made it look like it would fit in, so we've got this like triangle, which would fit in basically here. It would slot in, almost like a puzzle. I mean, it's not perfect because all of the bits are jutting out and broken down, but just having that small idea of where it could have gone and having that shown, and people can kind of make their own interpretations. It's pretty cool. Now, of course, we've got some of the more sky and animated aspects, which is this little glass basic smoke design we've got up here. It's very simple, just a bunch of glass panes stuck around, and again, because the story was supposed to be the house was only just put out, the whole area would still be smouldering. And that's also why we've got some animated smoke with some very hidden fireplaces. So that's also a very cool detail that you can add to your own. Now, my favorite detail by far are these little candles that just look like floating ash. They're barely noticeable, but when you notice it, it's just super cool. They're just floating bits of ash, and it makes the whole area look a lot more full and complete. Now, this final detailing step is also a perfect time for you to go through your colors and finalize your story. If you weren't too sure when you were building it, this is the perfect time to fix all of that stuff up now. So when I did this house, my final details included changing these colors to be a bit darker, because I actually decided that I wanted my story to be that the fire was only just put out, and by just I mean the wood on the house is still wet and some of the roof is a little bit damp, which is why it's darker in color, because there would have been a big fire truck, a big hose spraying water all around, and of course the rest of the house is going to get wet. So just adding a small detail like that and being able to explain why it's like that makes your house seem more alive. So now we've gone through all of those 5 steps. Let's cut to a little time lapse of putting all of them to use, and then let's go through that build as a bit of a review on what we've learnt. So here is the result of that time lapse. We have a brand new burnt house, and this one looks pretty cool. I went for a bit of a different idea. I wanted this house to be burnt down a while back, but maybe not super long ago. Maybe it's put in a place where it can still be maintained. It's not getting that much damage from sun or the elements, but it still was burnt down and it's been there for a little while now. So I went through some interesting color choices here as well. So instead of doing a very dark block palette like we did for our first house over here, the block palette is not as dark. It's a lot lighter, a lot more grey. And again, that's because I wanted this house to be burnt down a little while ago. We have some cool deep slate iron ore, which I think fit very well because it kind of looks like the roof is broken in. It looks like bits of wood slightly peeking out from all the burn, which is very perfect. And that's also why we've got this strip jungle wood. Now, before, the strip jungle wood in that house showed the lighter and contrasting elements compared to the dark area. But because this whole burnt section is a lot lighter because it was from long ago, this strip jungle wood is actually the darker element in contrast to the pale wood and the smooth quartz. Since I went with a much lighter color scheme for the main house shape, this stripped jungle wood helped show that basic burn mini gradient. It's not really perfect, but it shows the idea that I was trying to get across. I also tried to add some of this pale oak wood, which by the way, is perfect for anything burnt. When I built this house over here, I did not do it in the new 1.21.4 update, so I didn't have access to any of those blocks. It was super fun to add them over here. But yes, the pale oak wood is really perfect. I indented it by 1, so it looks like the main exterior wall has kind of been burnt off, while leaving the more secure structure on the inside. We have a few random things. We have some jungle trapdoors, chains, and nether brick fences, obviously. And those are just to show the broken down, jutting out things. It's the best detail to add for houses like these, all the burnt sections, the very broken things. And we can go through that structure step that I was saying before. I decided to have a window here when I built the main house. And actually, wait, we can go see that main house because I kept it because I did like the look of it. So this was the original house before we burnt it. I built this to begin with. As you can see, this whole section here is not detailed at all because this was the main side I decided to burn. So I'm not going to put a whole lot of detail, but if I got a basic idea of where things are, it helped me a lot. The back isn't detailed, but that's not because I decided to burn it. That's just because it's the back. Anyway, this side is detailed and it's lovely. It's all colored. It looks cool. And of course the front is detailed. And I decided to have a window here and 2 windows here. And that's why you can see, if we go back to this house, where the windows would have been. So we've got this big area that's got the glass that was blown out. Same with over here. The main window was here. That's why the burn carries down so far. And of course the front window, which I added a little cool element, which I thought was pretty fun. Instead of the lightning rods we've got here as like the, I don't know, bars on the windows, or yeah, basically the bars on the windows. I changed some of them to chains, so it looks like they've been burnt up and charred, and a little bit thinner as well, so it also shows that idea. Now for the final details, I didn't do as much as I did for this house, because this one wasn't as alive. It was meant to be here for a while, very stationary. However, one of my favorite sections is this whole bottom area. You may have seen in the time lapse I had a few friends pop over and they were super helpful with trying to figure out what I wanted with this terrain. So of course we've got a lot of burnt areas, we've got a lot of ash and piles of stuff. We've just got loads of grey because this was from a while ago. All the ash is settled instead of still in the sky like this one. We added frog spawn, which actually looks kind of cool. It's like little bits of broken ash or broken things from the house. It's just a cool thing to add, and plus it's grey, which is perfect. Now I love this area, so I wanted to add a grass field, and I wanted to experiment more with the terraining because I didn't get to do as much over there. So I used some very fun no block updates over here to get this burnt looking grass area. Now it looks a bit strange when you first look at it, but when you come in and actually have a thorough look through it, it makes a lot more sense. So let me explain. We've got a lot of the grass and the tall grass because this is also meant to be kind of overgrown. It's not very taken care of. and I wanted to try and get some burnt grass. Now, unfortunately, we don't have too tall grey grass. However, we do have pale hanging moss and coral, which is what I used to make that double tall grass. And to make the single grass, I just use pale hanging moss, but just the single part sticking over there, and then a few of the coral bits scattered around. But that just looks so cool. Like a burnt, compared to the normal green grass, it looks very similar, but obviously way more burnt. That's also why we've added some chains here and there to convey a very charred ground, charred grass or weeds or whatever else is around here. It was very difficult because we don't have such a spindly, dark coloured flora or fauna. So it was an improvisation, which is also why we've got some of the black candles up the top to show the more charred areas. But yeah, anyway, a bit of a ramble on this section, but I thought it was cool and I wanted to explain a bit of it. But yeah, that's the main things that we looked through on this build. We didn't add too many final details because it wasn't as important for the time frame and story I decided for this house, but it still looks cool, and I added a few little things which really pulled it together. So let's quickly go over those 5 steps. First, a reference photo, or a few. Grab a handful, find ones that you like and make sense for the story you want to tell. Second, build a house, no fire. Get an idea of the layout, the floor plan, where you want the blaze to start, and how you wanted it to finish. Third step, organize a color palette. Keep in mind the contrasting elements of a burnt building. Try and use lighter colors for the main house and darker colors for the burnt, just to get that silhouette idea. Fourth step, refine your story, finalize it. Start breaking down sections where you think the fire would be the most aggressive and build up the places where it may not be as much. And the last step, final details. Add some terraining, some animation, something to make your house look more alive or more lived in. Add debris, enforce your story with little elements so people can pick up context clues of time frame, how long the fire lasted, when it finished, and how recent it was. These little things can really help. And yeah, those are 5 steps on how to build your very own burnt house. I've built 2 of them. 2. Sorry, the third one behind me was because I wanted a cooler screenshot. But we built 2 of them and they both look pretty cool, but they're also very different. But using those 5 steps during my process really helped me refine these ideas and make 2 burnt houses with the same 5 steps that look completely different to each other. It's very cool to see and it's super fun. So hopefully try it out for yourself. Hopefully this tutorial and tips and tricks video has kind of helped you. And if you decide to build one of these lovely burnt houses, I have a Discord which will be in the description, and if you'd like to, please join it because I'd love to see your houses. And if you have any problems or questions that you're not too sure about, I'm always there for you to ask a question, send a screenshot, and I'll see if I can help. But overall, I just love seeing what people build. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and I hope to see you in the next one. And goodbye!